The morning sun cast long golden rays across the streets of Chicago, painting the towering skyscrapers in hues of amber and rose. It was early October, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of coffee from the corner cafe. The city was waking up, its heartbeat growing stronger with every passing minute as commuters flooded the sidewalks, their footsteps creating a symphony of urban rhythm. Among the sea of faces rushing toward their destinations, one woman moved with a different kind of purpose. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she walked with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate a world designed for those who could see. In her right hand, she held a white cane that tapped methodically against the concrete, sending back echoes that her trained ears translated into a mental map of the space around her. Margaret was 34 years old, with shoulder-length black hair that she had carefully styled that morning, spending nearly an hour making sure every strand was in place. She wore a navy blue blazer over a cream-colored blouse, and her black dress pants were pressed to perfection. On her feet were sensible flats, comfortable enough for walking but professional enough for the occasion that lay ahead. Today was the most important day of her life. Today, she had an interview at Harrison Technologies, one of the most prestigious tech companies in the Midwest. They were looking for a senior software developer, and Margaret had spent the last 8 years proving that being blind did not mean being incapable. She had graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in computer science. She had worked her way up from an entry-level position at a small startup to becoming a respected developer at a mid-sized company. She had created accessibility tools that were now used by thousands of blind and visually impaired people around the world. Her code was clean, her solutions were elegant, and her determination was unshakable. But none of that mattered to the world that judged her before she even opened her mouth. None of that mattered to the people who saw her white cane and immediately lowered their expectations. None of that mattered to the employers who had turned her away with polite smiles and vague promises to keep her resume on file. This time would be different. It had to be. Margaret paused at the corner of Michigan Avenue and Monroe Street, listening to the traffic signals, waiting for the audible beep that would tell her it was safe to cross. The wind picked up, sending a chill down her spine and rustling the leaves that had gathered in the gutters. She pulled her blazer tighter around her shoulders and took a deep breath. The beep sounded, and she stepped off the curb with confidence, her cane sweeping in practiced arcs before her. A car honked somewhere to her left, and she heard the impatient rev of an engine, but she continued forward, trusting her training, trusting herself. When she reached the other side, she turned right and continued down Monroe Street, counting her steps as she went. 47 steps to the next corner, 18 steps past the corner to the entrance of the Harrison Technologies building. She had made this walk 3 times in the past week, memorizing every crack in the sidewalk, every change in elevation, every potential obstacle. The building rose before her, a monument to corporate success and technological innovation. She couldn't see its gleaming glass facade or the way it reflected the morning sky, but she could feel its presence, massive and imposing, blocking the wind and casting a shadow that she sensed as a slight drop in temperature. Margaret approached the revolving door, her cane tapping against the metal frame. She paused, took another deep breath and pushed her way inside. The lobby was vast and echoing, all marble floors and soaring ceilings. Her footsteps seemed to multiply as they bounced off the hard surfaces, creating a disorienting cacophony that made it difficult to judge distances. But she had practiced for this too, using the echoes of her cane to map the space around her. She made her way toward the reception desk, which she knew was located directly ahead, approximately 30 steps from the entrance. Her cane encountered the smooth edge of the counter, and she stopped, arranging her face into a pleasant smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and confident. "My name is Margaret Chen. I have a 9 o'clock interview for the senior software developer position." There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Margaret heard the click of fingernails against a keyboard stopping abruptly. She heard a sharp intake of breath. She heard the creak of a chair as someone shifted their weight. And then she heard laughter. It wasn't loud or cruel, not at first. It was the kind of laugh that escapes before someone can stop it, the kind of laugh that reveals what a person truly thinks before they have a chance to hide it behind politeness and professionalism. "I'm sorry," a female voice said, though she clearly wasn't sorry at all. "You're here for the interview? The software developer interview?" "Yes," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady despite the familiar sting of humiliation that was beginning to spread through her chest. "I believe I'm a few minutes early." More laughter, this time not even attempting to be subtle. Margaret heard another voice join in, a male voice coming from somewhere to her right. She could picture them, these faceless receptionists, exchanging amused glances over her head, silently mocking her audacity for daring to apply for a job that was clearly meant for someone else, someone who could see. "Honey," the female voice said, dripping with condescension, "I think there might be some kind of mistake. This is a highly technical position. You need to be able to write code, look at screens, analyze data." "I'm aware of the requirements," Margaret said, her jaw tightening. "I have 8 years of experience as a software developer. I graduated from MIT. MIT, the male voice now, filled with skepticism. "They let blind people into MIT. Margaret felt her hands trembling, though whether from anger or hurt she couldn't quite tell. Perhaps both. "Yes, they do. And before you ask your next question, yes, I can code. I use screen readers and specialized software. I'm quite proficient, actually." The female receptionist laughed again, and Margaret heard the squeak of her chair as she leaned back, probably crossing her arms, probably shaking her head. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know who told you about this job or why you thought it would be a good idea to show up here, but trust me, you're wasting your time, and ours. Why don't you head on home and look for something more, suited to your abilities?" The words hit Margaret like physical blows, each one landing with precision in the soft places where her doubts lived. How many times had she heard variations of this speech? How many times had she been dismissed, underestimated, written off before she even had a chance to prove herself? She thought about turning around and walking out. It would be easier, wouldn't it? To retreat to the safety of her apartment, to curl up on her couch with her Braille reader, to tell herself that she was better off not working for a company that employed such small-minded people. But then she thought about her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her education after her father left. She thought about her mentor, Dr. James, who had believed in her when no one else would. She thought about all the blind children who were growing up right now, being told that there were certain things they could never do, certain dreams they could never chase. No, she would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her walk away. "I appreciate your concern," Margaret said, her voice cold and controlled, "but I believe I have a scheduled interview, and I intend to keep it. If you could please let the hiring manager know that I've arrived, I would be grateful." There was a snort from the male receptionist. "You really don't get it, do you? Even if they somehow forgot to screen you out, there's no way they're going to hire a blind person. It's just not practical. You'd be a liability, a PR stunt at best." "I think you'll find," Margaret said, "that I am considerably more than that." "Oh, this is rich," the female receptionist said. "Derek, are you seeing this? She actually thinks—" "Karen." The new voice came from behind Margaret, cutting through the lobby like a blade. It was deep and commanding, carrying an authority that immediately silenced the 2 receptionists. Margaret heard footsteps approaching, steady and purposeful. She heard the rustle of expensive fabric, the faint squeak of leather shoes on marble. She sensed someone stopping beside her, close enough that she could smell the subtle notes of sandalwood and cedar from his cologne. "Karen," the voice said again, quieter now, but no less intense, "would you care to explain what's going on here?" "Mr. Harrison," Karen stammered, all traces of amusement gone from her voice. We were just, this woman says she has an interview, but clearly there's been some kind of mistake." "A mistake?" Mr. Harrison repeated. What kind of mistake? Well, she can't look at her. She's blind. There was a pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Margaret stood frozen, unsure of what to expect, preparing herself for yet another dismissal, yet another disappointment. I can see that she's blind, Mr. Harrison said finally. What I'm failing to understand is why that's relevant to her interview. But, sir, Derek interjected, she can't possibly do the job. How would she even what? Mr. Harrison cut him off. Code, design software, solve complex problems, because the last time I checked, those activities require intelligence, creativity, and determination, not eyesight. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot that had been forming since she walked through the door. She didn't know who this man was, not really. She only knew that for the first time in what felt like forever, someone was standing up for her. Mr. Harrison, Karen tried again, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. I was just trying to save everyone's time. You know how these things go. She would never be able to keep up with the other developers, and that's enough. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. Margaret heard Karen's mouth snap shut. Miss Chen, Mr. Harrison said, turning to address her directly, I apologize for the reception you've received. This is not representative of our company's values or how we treat potential employees. I hope you'll allow me to make it up to you. You know my name, Margaret said, surprised. Of course I know your name. I personally review every application for senior positions. Yours was one of the most impressive I've seen in years. He paused. I must confess, I was very much looking forward to meeting the person behind such an extraordinary resume. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she was grateful that her complexion didn't show blushes easily. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That's very kind of you to say. It's not kindness, he said. It's the truth. And please call me Robert. He extended his hand, then seemed to catch himself. I'm sorry, I don't know the proper protocol. You can shake my hand, Margaret said, allowing herself a small smile. I may be blind, but I know where my hands are. She reached out and found his hand waiting for her. His grip was firm but not crushing, warm and reassuring. Well then, Ms. Chen, Robert said, shall we proceed to the interview? I believe we have a great deal to discuss. I would like that very much. As Robert guided her toward the elevators, Margaret heard him pause and turn back toward the reception desk. Karen, Derek, report to HR immediately. Your services will no longer be required. The sound of Karen's gasp and Derek's sputtering protest faded as the elevator doors closed, leaving Margaret alone with the CEO of Harrison Technologies. I'm sorry about that, Robert said again as the elevator began its ascent. I want you to know that what happened down there was inexcusable. It's not your fault, Margaret said. You didn't hire them for their empathy. No, but I should have done a better job of fostering a culture where that kind of behavior isn't tolerated. He sighed, and Margaret could hear the genuine regret in his voice. May I ask you something personal? You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. A soft chuckle. Fair enough. Does that happen often? What happened down there? Margaret considered the question, thinking about all the times she had been treated as less than, all the assumptions that had been made about her capabilities, all the doors that had been closed in her face. More often than you might think, she said finally. People see the cane and they stop seeing me. They see the disability and they forget to look for the ability. That must be exhausting. It is, but it also makes me stronger. Every person who doubts me just gives me more fuel to prove them wrong. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. Robert guided her out into what sounded like a busy office space. She could hear keyboards clicking, phones ringing, voices murmuring in hushed conversations. The air smelled of printer toner and coffee and the faint ozone scent of electronics. Our development floor, Robert explained as they walked. This is where the magic happens, as they say. We have about 40 developers working here, on everything from mobile apps to enterprise software to experimental AI projects. Margaret listened to the sounds around her, building a mental picture of the space. She heard the whir of computer fans, the soft hum of air conditioning, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby cubicle. She could sense the energy of the place, the creative electricity that seemed to crackle in the air. "It sounds like a good place to work," she said. "I like to think so. We've tried to create an environment where innovation can flourish, where people feel safe to take risks and make mistakes." He paused. "And where everyone is judged on their contributions, not their circumstances." They arrived at what Margaret assumed was Robert's office. She heard him open a door and gesture for her to enter. The space was quieter here, more intimate. She detected the scent of leather and old books, mingled with that same sandalwood cologne. "Please have a seat," Robert said, guiding her to a comfortable chair. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be lovely, thank you." She heard him move to what sounded like a small refrigerator, heard the clink of a glass, the splash of liquid. He pressed the glass into her hand, and she took a grateful sip. "So," Robert said, settling into a chair across from her, "let's talk about why you want to work at Harrison Technologies." And so they talked. For almost 2 hours they talked. Robert asked her about her experience at MIT, about her work developing accessibility tools, about her approach to problem-solving and her philosophy of software design. Margaret answered his questions thoughtfully and thoroughly, drawing on her years of experience and her deep knowledge of the field. But more than that, they connected. Margaret found herself opening up about things she rarely discussed, about her childhood, growing up as the only blind kid in her school, learning to navigate a world that wasn't built for her, about her mother's sacrifices, her father's abandonment, her determination to prove that her disability didn't define her, about her dreams for the future, her hopes of creating technology that would make the world more accessible for everyone. Robert listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions, sharing his own stories. He told her about founding Harrison Technologies 20 years ago, working out of his garage with nothing but a laptop and a dream. About the early struggles, the near bankruptcy, the moment when everything finally clicked and the company took off. About losing his wife to cancer 5 years ago and how it had changed his perspective on what really mattered in life. By the time the interview wound down, Margaret felt like she had known Robert Harrison for years rather than hours. There was a connection between them, a mutual respect that went beyond the professional. "Well," Robert said finally, "I think I've heard everything I need to hear. Do you have any questions for me?" Margaret thought for a moment. "Just one. Why did you stand up for me down there? You didn't have to do that." There was a long pause before Robert answered. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, tinged with something that sounded almost like pain. "Because my daughter is deaf," he said quietly. "She was born without hearing, and I've spent her entire life watching people underestimate her, watching them assume that because she can't hear, she can't think, can't learn, can't succeed." He took a breath. "Sarah graduated from Stanford last year, top of her class. She's now running our West Coast office. But I remember every single person who ever told her she couldn't do something because of her disability. I remember, and I will never forgive them for it." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry she had to go through that." "Don't be sorry, be proud, because every time someone told her she couldn't, she showed them she could, just like you've done, just like you're doing right now." He stood up, and Margaret heard him move around the desk toward her. "Miss Chen, Margaret, I would be honored if you would consider joining our team. I don't just want to offer you a job, I want to offer you a partnership. I want you to help us build a company that truly values every person, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. I want you to help us create technology that makes the world a better place for everyone." Margaret felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, the ones that couldn't see but could still cry. She blinked them back, trying to maintain her composure. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," Robert said simply. "Say yes, and let's change the world together." Margaret took a deep breath. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the obstacles she had overcome, all the people who had tried to hold her back. She thought about the future, the possibilities that stretched out before her like an endless highway. And then she smiled. "Yes," she said, "I would be honored to join your team, Mr. Harrison, Robert." He took her hand and shook it warmly. "Welcome to Harrison Technologies, Margaret. I have a feeling you're going to do extraordinary things here." As they walked back through the office, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that had sustained her through years of rejection, but a brighter hope, a confident hope, the hope of someone who was finally being seen for who she truly was. And somewhere deep inside, she made a silent promise, not just to herself, but to every person who had ever been told they couldn't. She would show them all. She would prove that disability didn't mean inability. She would change the world, one line of code at a time. The autumn sun was streaming through the windows when Margaret finally left the Harrison Technologies building. The air was warmer now, the city fully awake and bustling with midday energy. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the sun on her face, listening to the sounds of the city around her. Then she took out her phone and pressed the button that activated its voice control. "Call Mom," she said. The phone rang twice before her mother answered, her voice warm and worried as always. "Maggie, how did it go? Tell me everything." Margaret smiled, the biggest smile she had smiled in years. "Mom," she said, "I got the job." The weeks following Margaret's hiring were a whirlwind of activity, orientation, and adjustment. She arrived at Harrison Technologies on her first official day with the same navy blazer and cream blouse she had worn to the interview, carrying a leather bag that contained her laptop, her braille display, and a fierce determination to prove herself. The office was different during regular working hours. The sounds were fuller, more layered. Keyboards clattered in a constant rhythm. Voices rose and fell in waves of conversation. The coffee machine in the break room gurgled and hissed every few minutes as developers fed their caffeine addictions. Margaret had been assigned to a team working on a new mobile application for healthcare providers. Her team leader was a man named Brian Novak, who had been with the company for 12 years and had a reputation for being demanding but fair. He met her at the elevator on her first morning, his handshake firm and businesslike. "Margaret Chen," he said, "I've heard a lot about you. Robert speaks very highly of your work." "I hope I can live up to his expectations," Margaret replied. "Don't worry about expectations. Just do your job well and we'll get along fine." He paused. "I'm going to be honest with you. I've never worked with a blind developer before. I don't know what accommodations you need or how best to integrate you into the team. So I need you to tell me. Be direct. Don't assume I know anything because I don't." Margaret appreciated his honesty. She had encountered too many managers who claimed to be accommodating while secretly harboring doubts, or who made assumptions about what she could and couldn't do. Brian's straightforward approach was refreshing. "I use a screen reader," she explained as they walked toward the development area. "It reads the text on the screen aloud to me. I also have a braille display that I use for reviewing code in detail. For most tasks, I don't need any special accommodations. I just need access to the same systems and tools as everyone else." "That can be arranged," Brian said. "What about meetings, code reviews, pair programming? I can participate in all of those. For visual presentations, I might ask someone to describe charts or diagrams. For code reviews, I can read the code on my own, but it helps if people announce themselves when they speak, so I know who's talking." Brian nodded, though of course Margaret couldn't see the gesture. "I'll let the team know. Anything else?" "Just one thing," Margaret said. "Please don't treat me differently because of my disability. I don't want special treatment. I just want a fair chance to show what I can do." "Fair enough." They stopped walking. "This is your desk. The IT department should have set up your equipment already. Take some time to get settled, and I'll introduce you to the team in about an hour." Margaret felt for the edge of the desk and set her bag down. She explored the surface with her hands, finding the keyboard, the monitors that she couldn't use, the phone. To her right was a small potted plant that someone had thoughtfully placed on her desk, perhaps not realizing that she couldn't see it. She touched its leaves anyway, appreciating the gesture. She spent the next hour configuring her equipment, installing her screen reader and braille display, adjusting the settings to her preferences. The IT department had done a good job of setting up her access, and she was impressed by how smoothly everything worked. Either someone had done their research on accessibility, or Harrison Technologies had hired blind employees before. At 10 o'clock, Brian gathered the team in a small conference room for introductions. There were 8 people on the team, and Margaret listened carefully as each one introduced themselves, committing their voices to memory. There was Priya Sharma, a senior developer with a lilting Indian accent and a quick wit. Michael Chen, no relation, a junior developer who seemed nervous and eager to please. Sandra Williams, a middle-aged woman with a warm southern drawl who handled quality assurance. James Park, a Korean-American man with a dry sense of humor who specialized in database architecture. Yuki Tanaka, a recent hire from Japan who spoke softly and precisely. Marcus Johnson, a booming voice and a laugh that could be heard from across the office. And finally, David Rodriguez, the team's project manager, who had a calm, measured way of speaking that suggested years of experience managing difficult situations. "We're glad to have you on the team, Margaret," David said after the introductions were complete. "We've been looking for another senior developer for months, and when Robert told us about your background, we knew you'd be a perfect fit." "I'm excited to be here," Margaret said. "I've read up on the project, and I think there's some really innovative work being done." "We like to think so," Priya said, "but there's still a lot to do. We're behind schedule, and the client is getting antsy. We could use all the help we can get." "Then let's get to work," Margaret said. And so began Margaret's tenure at Harrison Technologies. The first few weeks were challenging, as any new job would be. She had to learn the code base, understand the project requirements, and figure out how she fit into the team's existing workflows. There were moments of frustration, times when her screen reader couldn't quite interpret a complex diagram, or when her braille display struggled with poorly formatted code. But she persevered, asking questions when she needed to, figuring things out on her own when she could. What surprised her most was how quickly she was accepted by her colleagues. She had expected at least some resistance, some subtle skepticism about her abilities. But the team at Harrison Technologies seemed genuinely interested in her work and impressed by her contributions. They asked her questions about accessibility, about how she approached coding, about her experiences as a blind developer. And when she answered, they listened with genuine curiosity rather than condescending tolerance. Not that everything was perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when someone would say, "Did you see that email?" and then immediately apologize for the poor choice of words. There were still people in the company who looked at her with pity or surprise, who seemed to view her presence as a curiosity rather than a normal state of affairs. And there was one person who made her life significantly more difficult than it needed to be. His name was Victor Kane, and he was the head of the marketing department. He was tall and handsome, with a smooth voice and an easy charm that he used to get what he wanted. He had been with the company for 15 years and had watched Robert build it from the ground up. Some people said he resented that Robert had never made him a partner. Others said he was angling to take over when Robert retired. Whatever his motivations, Victor Kane did not like Margaret Chen. Their first encounter came during a company-wide meeting in Margaret's third week. She was sitting near the back of the auditorium, listening as Robert gave a presentation on the company's quarterly results. The numbers were good, better than expected, and the mood in the room was celebratory. "And finally," Robert said, his voice warm with pride, "I want to take a moment to welcome our newest senior developer, Margaret Chen. Margaret comes to us with an impressive background in software development and a particular expertise in accessibility. She's already making valuable contributions to the healthcare app project, and I have no doubt she'll be an asset to our team for years to come." There was a polite round of applause. Margaret felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and pleasure. "A blind developer," a voice said from somewhere to her left. It was Victor Kane, his tone carrying just loud enough to be heard by those around him, but not quite loud enough to interrupt Robert's presentation. "How progressive of us. I wonder if she can actually write code, or if she's just here to check a diversity box." Margaret felt the words like a slap. She turned her head toward the voice, unable to see the speaker but able to pinpoint his location. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another voice cut in. "Shut up, Victor." It was Priya, sitting a few seats to Margaret's right. Her voice was sharp and angry. "I was just making an observation," Victor said smoothly. "No need to get defensive." "Your observation was rude and ignorant," Priya said. "Margaret is one of the best developers I've ever worked with. She's contributed more to the project in 3 weeks than some people contribute in 3 months. "I'm sure she has," Victor said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure everything is just wonderful." The exchange was brief, lasting only a few seconds, before Robert continued his presentation, and the attention of the room shifted back to the front. But Margaret didn't forget it. She filed it away, along with the sound of Victor's voice, the particular way he pronounced his words, the subtle cruelty that lurked beneath his charm. Over the following months, Victor made his feelings about Margaret clear in dozens of small ways. He questioned her work in meetings, suggesting that her code should be double-checked because of her disability. He made jokes about hiring guide dogs for the office. He complained loudly about the cost of accessibility accommodations, suggesting that the money could be better spent elsewhere. Margaret endured it all with quiet dignity, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. She focused on her work, on proving herself through her contributions rather than her words. And slowly but surely, she won over even the skeptics. Her code was cleaner than most, her solutions more elegant. She had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed, for finding bugs that had eluded her colleagues, for optimizing processes that had grown inefficient over time. But it was a project of her own creation that truly established her reputation. It started as a personal endeavor, something she worked on in her spare time. She had noticed that the company's internal communication tools were not fully accessible. The chat program didn't work well with screen readers. The project management software required constant visual navigation. Even the simple act of booking a meeting room required clicking on a visual calendar that she couldn't see. So she started building alternatives. A chat client that was optimized for screen readers, a project management dashboard that could be navigated entirely by keyboard, a booking system that used voice commands. She didn't ask permission or seek approval. She just built what she needed, and when it was done, she shared it with her team. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who had never worked with accessibility tools before discovered that they were actually faster and more efficient than the visual interfaces they were used to. People who struggled with carpal tunnel syndrome found the keyboard navigation easier on their wrists. People who worked remotely appreciated the voice commands that let them manage their tasks while doing other things. Within a month, Margaret's tools had spread throughout the company. Within 2 months, they had been adopted as the official standard. And within 3 months, Robert Harrison was standing in her doorway with a proposition. "I want you to lead a new initiative," he said. "A company-wide accessibility overhaul. Every product we make, every tool we use, I want it to be accessible to everyone, regardless of their abilities. And I want you to be in charge." Margaret was stunned. "That's a huge undertaking," she said. "It would require significant resources, dedicated staff." "You'll have whatever you need," Robert said. "Budget, people, time. This is important to me, Margaret. It's important to the future of this company." "Why?" Margaret asked. "I mean, I'm grateful, but this goes beyond what most companies would do. What's driving this?" Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed and took a seat across from her desk. "Sarah called me last week," he said. "My daughter. She was telling me about a client meeting she had, a big potential contract with a government agency. She's fluent in American Sign Language. She can read lips. She's brilliant at her job. But the client had their back to her the whole time, mumbling into their notes, refusing to use the interpreter she had brought. They treated her like she wasn't even in the room. That must have been incredibly frustrating for her, Margaret said softly. Frustrating doesn't begin to cover it. She lost the contract, not because she wasn't qualified, but because they couldn't see past her disability. Robert's voice was heavy with anger and sadness. I've spent 20 years building this company. I've always believed that what mattered was merit, hard work, talent, but I'm starting to realize that the world doesn't always work that way. That sometimes, no matter how good you are, people will only see what you can't do instead of what you can. He leaned forward, and though Margaret couldn't see his expression, she could hear the intensity in his voice. I want to change that. I want Harrison Technologies to be a leader in accessibility, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it makes good business sense. There are millions of people with disabilities who are underserved by the tech industry. There are products waiting to be built, markets waiting to be tapped. And there are talented people like you and Sarah who are being overlooked because companies don't know how to accommodate them. Margaret felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of gratitude and determination. I would be honored to lead this initiative, she said, but I want you to know that I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for every blind kid who's been told they can't be a programmer, every deaf person who's been denied a job they were qualified for, every person in a wheelchair who's been locked out of a building because no one thought to build a ramp. That's exactly why I knew you were the right person for this job, Robert said. You understand what's at stake. And so the Harrison Accessibility Initiative was born. Margaret assembled a team of developers, designers, and accessibility experts. They audited every product the company made, identifying areas for improvement and developing solutions. They created new guidelines for inclusive design, trained employees on accessibility best practices, and established partnerships with disability advocacy organizations. It was hard work, exhausting work, the kind of work that kept Margaret up late at night and brought her into the office on weekends. But it was also the most rewarding work she had ever done. Every accessible feature they added, every barrier they removed, felt like a small victory in a larger war. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Victor Kane opposed the initiative at every turn, arguing that it was a waste of resources, that the market didn't care about accessibility, that Margaret was using her position to advance a personal agenda. He tried to sabotage her projects, spreading rumors about cost overruns and missed deadlines. He whispered in the ears of board members, suggesting that Robert's judgment had been compromised by his emotional attachment to his disabled daughter. But Margaret refused to be deterred. She documented her successes meticulously, building an irrefutable case for the business value of accessibility. She cultivated allies throughout the company, from entry-level employees to senior executives. And when Victor's attacks became too blatant to ignore, she confronted him directly. It happened at a quarterly review meeting in front of the entire executive team. Victor had just finished presenting his objections to the accessibility initiative, complete with charts and graphs that purported to show the negative impact on the company's bottom line. "With all due respect," Margaret said when he had finished, "your analysis is fundamentally flawed." Victor's voice dripped with condescension. "Oh, please enlighten us. I'm sure your perspective is very valuable." Margaret ignored the insult. "You've calculated the costs of accessibility without considering the benefits. You've looked at the short-term expenses without projecting the long-term returns. And you've completely failed to account for the market opportunity." She turned to address the rest of the room. Last year, the global market for assistive technology was worth $20 billion. By the end of this decade, it's projected to reach $40 billion. That's not counting the broader market of people who benefit from accessible design, including the elderly, people with temporary injuries, and anyone who's ever struggled with a poorly designed interface. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Our accessibility features have already increased customer satisfaction scores by 15%. They've reduced support calls by 20%, and they've opened up entirely new markets that our competitors haven't even begun to tap. Those numbers are inflated, Victor said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. They're audited, Margaret replied calmly, by an independent firm. I can provide the documentation if you'd like to review it. She heard Victor shift in his seat, heard the murmur of voices around the table. She couldn't see the expressions on people's faces, but she could feel the tide of opinion turning in her favor. The truth is, she continued, accessibility isn't a charity case. It's not about checking boxes or being politically correct. It's about building better products for everyone. The same features that help a blind user navigate a website also help a sighted user who's driving a car and can't look at their phone. The same captions that help a deaf user watch a video also help someone who's in a noisy environment or trying not to wake their sleeping baby. She turned back toward Victor's voice. So you can continue to oppose this initiative if you want. You can keep trying to undermine my work and sabotage my projects. But you should know that you're not just fighting me. You're fighting the future of this industry, and that's a fight you're going to lose. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Robert spoke, his voice filled with barely contained pride. I think that settles it. The Accessibility Initiative will continue with full funding and full support. Victor, I suggest you find a way to work with Margaret rather than against her. This company has no room for people who can't see the value in what we're trying to build. It was a turning point, not just for the initiative, but for Margaret's place in the company. After that meeting, the opposition faded. Colleagues who had been skeptical became enthusiastic supporters, and Victor Kane, though he never apologized or admitted defeat, stopped his attacks and retreated into a sullen silence. Months passed, and the Harrison Accessibility Initiative grew from a small project into a core part of the company's identity. Margaret was promoted to Vice President of Accessible Design, a newly created position that reported directly to Robert. She hired more staff, expanded her team scope, and began working on an ambitious new product, an operating system designed from the ground up to be fully accessible to users with any kind of disability. It was during this period that Margaret's relationship with Robert deepened. What had started as professional respect had evolved into something closer to friendship. They had lunch together regularly, discussing not just business, but philosophy, life, the state of the world. Robert confided in her about his struggles with loneliness since his wife's death. Margaret opened up about her own journey, the challenges she had faced, the dreams she still harbored. "Can I ask you something personal?" Robert said one afternoon as they sat in his office, the autumn sun streaming through the windows. "You can always ask," Margaret replied. "Whether I answer is another matter." Robert chuckled. "Fair enough. I've been wondering, all these years of fighting for recognition, proving yourself over and over again, doesn't it ever get exhausting? Don't you ever just want to give up?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Of course I do," she said finally. "There are days when I wake up and I just want to stay in bed. Days when I'm so tired of explaining myself, of justifying my existence, of being the only blind person in every room. Days when I wonder if it's all worth it." "What keeps you going on those days?" "A lot of things," she said. "My mother who sacrificed everything for me, my mentor who believed in me when no one else did, the kids I visit at the school for the blind, who look up to me as proof that they can achieve their dreams." She paused. "But mostly it's the work itself. The knowledge that every product I make more accessible, every barrier I remove, makes the world a little bit better for someone who comes after me." "That's a beautiful way to look at it," Robert said softly. "It's the only way I know how to look at it," Margaret replied. "The alternative is despair, and despair doesn't build anything. It doesn't change anything. It just consumes you until there's nothing left." Robert was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. I've been debating whether to bring this up because it's complicated and I don't want to put you in an awkward position. But I feel like if I don't say it, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Margaret felt her pulse quicken, though she wasn't sure why. "What is it?" "I've been thinking a lot about the future of this company, about what happens when I'm not here anymore. I'm not getting any younger, and this past year with all its health scares has made me realize that I need to start planning for succession." "That's understandable," Margaret said carefully, unsure where this was going. "The board has been pressuring me to name a successor for years," Robert continued. "There are several candidates, people who have been with the company for decades, who know the business inside and out. Victor Kane, for instance, has been lobbying for the position since the day I met him." Margaret's jaw tightened at the mention of Victor's name. "I'm sure he has. But I don't think he's the right person. I don't think any of the obvious candidates are the right person." Robert took a deep breath. "I think the right person is you, Margaret." Margaret felt the world tilt beneath her. "Me? Robert, I've only been here for 2 years. I'm not even on the executive track. "You're exactly what this company needs," Robert interrupted. "You're brilliant, you're driven, you have a vision for the future that no one else here can match. More importantly, you have integrity. You care about doing the right thing, not just the profitable thing. That's rare in business, Margaret. That's precious." "But I'm blind," Margaret said, voicing the objection she knew others would raise. "People won't take a blind CEO seriously. They'll say you're making a political statement, that you're putting ideology over competence." "Let them say what they want," Robert said firmly. "I've spent my whole life doing what other people expected of me, and where did it get me? A beautiful house, a successful company, and a dead wife I never spent enough time with because I was always too busy working." His voice cracked. "I'm done living by other people's rules, Margaret. I want to leave a legacy that matters. And I think you're the one who can make that happen." Margaret sat in stunned silence, her mind racing through the implications. CEO of Harrison Technologies, one of the most powerful positions in the tech industry. A chance to shape the future of an entire company, to influence an entire industry, to prove once and for all that disability was not a limitation, but a different kind of strength. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything right now," Robert said. "This isn't an immediate decision. I'm not planning to retire tomorrow, but I wanted you to know where I stand, so you can start thinking about it, start preparing for it." "And the board? They'll just accept this?" "The board will do what I tell them to do. This is still my company, and I still have enough shares to make my wishes stick." A pause. "But it won't be easy. There will be opposition, from Victor and others. There will be doubts and questions and challenges at every turn. You'll have to fight for it, just like you fought for everything else in your life." Margaret felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "When have I ever backed down from a fight?" Robert laughed, a warm, relieved sound. "That's my girl, I knew you'd say that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the future settling around them like a blanket. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice quiet but determined. "Thank you, Robert, for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he said. "I never had any doubt." The transition didn't happen overnight. Robert spent the next 18 months preparing Margaret for the role, introducing her to key stakeholders, involving her in high-level strategic decisions, gradually shifting more and more responsibility onto her shoulders. There were skeptics, of course, board members who questioned his judgment, executives who felt passed over, media commentators who wondered aloud whether a blind CEO could really lead a major technology company. Margaret answered them all in the same way, through her work. She drove the completion of the accessible operating system, which launched to critical acclaim and commercial success. She negotiated a major partnership with a European Accessibility Consortium. She delivered a keynote speech at the industry's largest conference that was watched by millions and widely praised for its vision and eloquence. And when Robert finally announced his retirement at the company's annual shareholder meeting, naming Margaret as his successor, the applause was long and loud. Not everyone was happy, of course. Victor Kane resigned the next day, releasing a bitter statement to the press that accused Robert of making a politically motivated decision that would damage the company's competitiveness. Several other executives followed him out the door, either out of loyalty to Victor or out of discomfort with the new regime. But most people stayed. Most people recognized what Margaret had accomplished, what she represented, what she could do. And when she stood before the company on her first day as CEO, her white cane in one hand and a microphone in the other, she felt something she had never quite felt before, truly seen. I know that many of you have questions about my ability to lead this company, she said, her voice carrying through the packed auditorium. I know that some of you have doubts. I know that there are people watching right now who think that Robert made a mistake, that I'm in over my head, that I'll fail within a year. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. To those people I say this, watch me. The room erupted in applause. I don't stand before you as a blind CEO. I stand before you as a CEO who happens to be blind. There is a difference. My blindness is not the most important thing about me. It is not the thing that defines me or limits me. It is simply one aspect of who I am, one piece of a much larger puzzle. She turned slowly, addressing all corners of the room. The same is true for all of us. We are more than our disabilities, more than our circumstances, more than the boxes that society tries to put us in. We are engineers and designers. We are problem solvers and innovators. We are dreamers and builders. And together we are going to change the world. The applause grew louder, sustained, almost deafening. Margaret stood at the center of it, feeling the sound wash over her like a wave, carrying her toward a future she had never dared to imagine. Years passed. Margaret Chen became one of the most respected business leaders of her generation. Under her guidance, Harrison Technologies grew from a regional player into a global powerhouse, known not just for its products, but for its commitment to inclusion and accessibility. The company's workforce became one of the most diverse in the industry, with employees representing every kind of ability and disability. Margaret never forgot where she came from. She established a scholarship fund for blind students pursuing careers in technology. She funded research into new assistive technologies. She spoke at schools and conferences and congressional hearings, advocating for policies that would make the world more accessible for everyone. And every year, on the anniversary of her hiring, she made a point of visiting the lobby of the Harrison Technologies building. She would walk through the doors, just as she had on that fateful morning so many years ago, and make her way to the reception desk. The receptionist who greeted her now was a young man named Jason, who had been paralyzed in a car accident during his senior year of high school. He had come to Harrison Technologies through one of Margaret's diversity hiring programs and had worked his way up from the mailroom to the front desk. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," he would say, and Margaret would smile and reply, "Good morning, Jason. How are things looking today?" It was a small ritual, but it meant everything. A reminder of how far they had come, a promise of how far they would go. On the 10th anniversary of her hiring, Margaret was in her office when her assistant buzzed in with an unusual request. "There's someone here to see you, Ms. Chen. She says her name is Karen Mitchell. She says you knew each other a long time ago." Margaret felt a jolt of recognition. Karen, the receptionist who had laughed at her on the day of her interview, the woman who had tried to send her away in shame. She hadn't thought about Karen in years, had assumed she had moved on to some other job, some other life. "Send her in," Margaret said after a moment's hesitation. She heard the door open, heard footsteps crossing the carpet, heard the creak of someone settling into the chair across from her desk. The silence stretched for a long moment. "Hello, Karen," Margaret said finally. "It's been a long time." 15 years. Karen's voice was different than Margaret remembered. Older, tired, stripped of its former arrogance. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "I remember everyone who underestimates me," Margaret said. "It helps me stay motivated." Karen let out a shaky breath. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that. What I said to you that day, the way I treated you, it was unforgivable. And yet here you are, seeking forgiveness. No, Karen said quietly, not forgiveness. I don't expect that. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I wanted you to know that I was wrong about you, about everything. Margaret was silent, waiting for Karen to continue. After I was fired, I couldn't find another job, Karen said. No one wanted to hire the woman who had been caught mocking a disabled applicant. I went through my savings, lost my apartment, ended up living with my sister. I blamed everyone but myself. I blamed Robert for overreacting. I blamed you for reporting me. I blamed the world for being unfair. It took me years to realize that the only person I should have been blaming was myself, that I had been the unfair one, the cruel one, the one who had judged someone based on their disability instead of their ability. She paused, and Margaret heard her take a shaky breath. My son was born blind, Karen said. 3 years ago, a genetic condition that no one saw coming. When the doctor told us, I just sat there and cried. Not because my son was blind, but because I finally understood what I had done to you. What people like me do to people like you every single day. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the old anger, the old hurt. How is your son? He's wonderful, Karen said, and Margaret could hear the smile in her voice. He's the most amazing person I've ever known. He's learning to read Braille. He's taking piano lessons. He's so full of life and joy and determination. A pause. He reminds me of you, actually. He doesn't let anything stop him. Children rarely do, Margaret said. It's only when we grow up that we learn to limit ourselves. That's why I'm here, Karen said. I want my son to grow up in a world that doesn't limit him. I want him to have the same opportunities that anyone else has. And I want to help make that happen. She leaned forward, and Margaret heard the urgency in her voice. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but Harrison Technologies has a parent advocacy program for families of children with disabilities. I've been volunteering there for the past year. The coordinator told me that you're expanding the program and looking for a new director. I want to apply for that position. Margaret considered this for a long moment. The irony was not lost on her. The woman who had once tried to turn her away from a job was now asking her for one. Why should I hire you? She asked finally. Give me one good reason. Karen was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Because I understand now. I understand what it's like to have people look at your child and see only what they can't do. I understand the fear, the frustration, the determination to prove the world wrong. I understand in a way that I never could have before, and I want to use that understanding to help other families. She took a breath. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to make it right, to do something good with the years I have left. Margaret sat in silence, weighing the words, the implications, the possibilities. 15 years ago, she had walked into this building hoping for a chance. Someone had given her that chance, had seen past her disability to the person underneath. Could she do any less for Karen? The position requires working closely with families, she said slowly. Many of them have had experiences similar to yours. They've been dismissed, mocked, told that their children can't succeed. They need someone who understands that pain and can help them overcome it. I understand, Karen said. I've lived it. You also need to understand that I will hold you to the highest standards, Margaret continued. I don't tolerate prejudice in any form. If I ever hear that you've treated anyone the way you treated me, you'll be gone before you can clean out your desk. I understand that too. Margaret was quiet for another long moment. Then she reached across her desk, her hand outstretched. Welcome to Harrison Technologies, Karen, she said. Don't make me regret this. Karen took her hand, and Margaret felt the tremble in her grip, the relief and gratitude and determination all mixed together. I won't, Karen said. I promise you I won't. After Karen left, Margaret sat alone in her office, thinking about the strange paths that life takes. 15 years ago, she had been a blind woman with a dream, and a white cane, walking into a lobby full of judgment and doubt. Now she was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, surrounded by people who believed in her vision and supported her mission. And the woman who had laughed at her was now working for her, trying to make amends for sins she couldn't undo. Life was strange that way, full of circles and ironies and unexpected second chances. Margaret rose from her desk and walked to the window. She couldn't see the city spread out before her, but she could feel its presence, its energy, its endless potential. She could hear the honking of horns and the rumble of traffic, the distant wail of a siren and the closer sound of laughter from the street below. This was her city, her company, her life, and she was going to make the most of every moment. She thought about her mother, who had passed away 3 years ago, just long enough to see her daughter become CEO. She thought about Dr. James, her mentor, who still sent her encouraging emails every few months. She thought about Robert Harrison, who had retired to a house on the lake and spent his days fishing and playing with his grandchildren. She thought about all the people who had believed in her and all the people who hadn't. She thought about the obstacles she had overcome and the battles she had won. She thought about the future, stretching out before her like an endless highway, full of possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. And she smiled. The world was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but changing nonetheless, and she was proud to be a part of that change. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. Her next meeting was in 15 minutes, a video call with the heads of their European divisions to discuss the expansion of the Accessibility Initiative into new markets. After that, she had a lunch meeting with a congressional committee exploring legislation to mandate accessibility standards in public technology. After that, a visit to a local school for blind children, where she would speak about her journey and answer their questions. It was a full day, as all her days were, but she wouldn't have it any other way. Margaret picked up her white cane and headed for the door. There was work to be done, progress to be made, mountains to be moved. And she was just getting started. The autumn sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Margaret couldn't see but could somehow sense. A warmth on her face and a softness in the air that spoke of endings and beginnings all at once. She stood on the rooftop terrace of the Harrison Technologies building, a space that Robert had designed specifically for moments like this. The wind carried the sounds of the city up to her, a symphony of horns and voices and distant music that she had come to love over the years. Beside her stood Sarah Harrison, Robert's daughter, who had flown in from the West Coast for the company's 20th anniversary celebration. Sarah was 35 now, with her father's determination and her own quiet strength. She ran the company's accessibility research division, developing new technologies that helped people with all kinds of disabilities live fuller, more independent lives. "Dad would have loved this," Sarah said, her voice tinged with sadness. Robert had passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months ago, surrounded by his family. The company had mourned him like the loss of a family member. "He would have," Margaret agreed. "He always said that the 20th anniversary would be the big one, the one where we proved that our vision was sustainable." "And we did it," Sarah said. "Profits up for the 10th straight year. Customer satisfaction at an all-time high, and the Accessibility Initiative has been adopted by 60% of our industry. That's his legacy, Margaret. That's your legacy." Margaret shook her head. "It's not about legacy, it's about the work. The work goes on, whether we're here or not." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she reached out and took Margaret's hand. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" "Of course." "When Dad first told me he was going to make you CEO, I was furious. Not because you weren't qualified, not because you were blind, but because I thought he should have chosen me. I was his daughter. I had worked my whole life to prove myself to him. And then you came along and took what I thought was rightfully mine." Margaret nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. You weren't exactly warm to me in those first few years." "I was awful," Sarah admitted. I was cold and dismissive, and I did everything I could to undermine you without being obvious about it. I'm so ashamed of how I behaved." "What changed?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It was the year you launched the accessible operating system. I was in a meeting with a group of deaf developers, getting their feedback on some new features. One of them, a young woman named May, started talking about how the operating system had changed her life, how for the first time she felt like technology was working with her instead of against her. And then she said something that I'll never forget." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Margaret Chen understands us. Not because she's deaf, but because she knows what it's like to be invisible, to have the world treat you like you don't matter. And she's using her power to make sure that no one feels invisible ever again.'" Sarah's voice cracked. "That's when I realized that Dad had made the right choice, not because you were the most qualified or the most experienced, but because you had something that I didn't. You had empathy born of struggle. You had determination forged in adversity. You had a vision that went beyond profit margins and market share." She squeezed Margaret's hand. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry for all the ways I tried to hold you back." Margaret felt tears prickling at the corners of her sightless eyes. "Thank you for telling me that, Sarah. It means more than you know." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the city below, feeling the wind on their faces. Then Sarah spoke again. "There's something else I need to tell you. The board met this morning. They voted unanimously to name the Accessibility Initiative the Robert Harrison Foundation for Inclusive Technology. They want to spin it off as a non-profit, funded by the company but independent. And they want you to be the founding director." Margaret felt her breath catch. "The founding director? But I'm the CEO. I can't do both." "You can if you want to," Sarah said. "The board is prepared to offer you a choice. You can stay on as CEO and let someone else run the foundation, or you can step down and devote yourself fully to the work that you've always been most passionate about." It was a choice she had never expected to face, a choice between power and purpose, between running a company and changing the world. "What would you do?" Margaret asked. Sarah laughed softly. "I think you already know the answer to that. You've always known. The CEO job was never about the title or the salary or the corner office. It was about having the resources and the platform to make a difference. Now you can make that difference without all the bureaucracy and the board meetings and the investor relations." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything she had accomplished and everything she still wanted to do. She thought about the blind children she had met at schools around the world, their faces bright with hope and possibility. She thought about the emails she received every day from people who said that Harrison Technologies had changed their lives. She thought about the future she wanted to build, a future where disability was not a barrier, but simply a different way of being human. "You're right," she said finally. "I do know. I think I've always known." She turned toward Sarah, reaching out to touch her face, tracing the lines of her features with gentle fingers. "I'm going to miss you," she said. "I'm going to miss all of this." "You're not going anywhere," Sarah said, her voice warm with affection. "You'll just be down the hall instead of in the corner office, and I'll be calling you every 5 minutes for advice." Margaret laughed. "I look forward to it." The next morning, Margaret announced her decision to the company. She would step down as CEO at the end of the quarter, handing the reins to Sarah Harrison, who had proven herself more than capable of leading the company into its next chapter. She would become the founding director of the Robert Harrison Foundation for Inclusive Technology, with a mandate to expand the accessibility work that had defined her tenure. The announcement was met with a mixture of sadness and celebration. Sadness that Margaret was leaving the top job. Celebration that her mission would continue in an even more focused and ambitious form. At her farewell dinner, held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel, Margaret stood before a crowd of employees, partners, family members, and friends. She had prepared a speech, but as she opened her mouth to deliver it, she found herself setting it aside. "I had something very eloquent written out," she said, and the crowd laughed. "But I've decided to speak from the heart instead." She took a deep breath. 22 years ago, I walked into the lobby of this company as a job applicant. I was nervous, hopeful, determined. I had spent my whole life fighting to be seen as something other than my disability, and I believed that this was my chance to prove myself once and for all. She paused, remembering that morning, the click of her cane on marble, the laughter of the receptionists, the moment when everything changed. I was laughed at, mocked, told that I was wasting everyone's time, told that there was no way a blind person could do the job I was applying for. She heard the murmur of the crowd, felt the shift in the room as people leaned forward, hanging on her every word. And then a man walked in who saw something different, a man who looked past my disability and saw my ability, a man who gave me a chance when no one else would. Her voice caught, and she had to pause to collect herself. Robert Harrison changed my life. But more than that, he changed the life of everyone in this room, everyone who has ever used one of our products, everyone who has ever benefited from our accessibility features, everyone who has ever felt seen and valued in a world that too often makes people feel invisible. She gestured around the room, taking in the space she couldn't see but could somehow feel. This is his legacy. Not the buildings or the products or the profit margins, but the lives he touched, the barriers he broke down, the world he helped to create. She smiled, feeling the tears streaming down her cheeks but not caring. I am so proud to have been a part of this journey. I am so grateful for the trust that Robert placed in me and for the support that all of you have shown me over the years. And I am so excited for what comes next. She raised her glass. To Robert Harrison, to Harrison Technologies, and to a future where everyone, regardless of their abilities, has the chance to achieve their dreams. The room erupted in applause, and Margaret stood at the center of it, feeling the love and respect washing over her like a warm tide. This was her moment, her legacy, her gift to the world. And it was only the beginning. 5 years later, Margaret Chen was walking through the halls of the Lighthouse School for the Blind, her white cane tapping out a familiar rhythm on the linoleum floor. The school had been the recipient of a major grant from the Robert Harrison Foundation, and she made a point of visiting at least once a month to check on their progress and to spend time with the students. Today, she was meeting with a special group, the school's first graduating class of students who had been trained using the Foundation's new curriculum, designed to prepare blind and visually impaired students for careers in technology. There were 12 of them, ranging in age from 18 to 22. Some had been blind from birth, like Margaret. Others had lost their sight to illness or injury. All of them had defied the odds to reach this moment. Margaret sat at the head of the conference table, listening as each student introduced themselves and shared their plans for the future. There was James, who had been accepted to MIT and planned to study computer science. There was Amara, who had secured an internship at Google's accessibility division. There was Marcus, who was going to work for the foundation itself, developing new educational tools for blind students. When they had all finished, Margaret spoke. "I want to tell you a story," she said. "A story about a young woman who walked into a job interview 27 years ago, not knowing that her life was about to change." She told them about Karen and Derek, about the laughter and the mockery, about Robert Harrison walking in and standing up for her, about the journey that followed, the struggles and the triumphs, the obstacles overcome and the mountains moved. The students listened in rapt attention, hearing perhaps for the first time the full arc of the woman who had become their role model and their champion. "I tell you this story," Margaret concluded, "not to inspire pity or to seek praise. I tell you this story because I want you to understand something important." She paused, making sure she had their full attention. "The world will try to limit you. It will tell you that there are certain things you can't do, certain dreams you can't chase, certain heights you can't reach. People will look at you and see only your disability. They will make assumptions about what you're capable of before you ever have a chance to show them. She leaned forward, her voice firm and passionate. But here's the truth. The only limits that matter are the ones you accept. Every barrier is just a problem waiting to be solved. Every obstacle is just an opportunity to prove yourself. Every person who says you can't is just giving you more fuel to show them that you can. She smiled, feeling the energy in the room, the determination radiating from these young people who had already accomplished so much. You are the future. Not because you're blind, but because you're brilliant, because you're determined, because you refuse to accept the limitations that others try to impose on you. The world needs people like you. The world needs your perspective, your creativity, your unique way of seeing what others miss. She stood up, and the students stood with her. Go out there and show them what you're made of. Go out there and change the world. And when someone tries to tell you that you can't, remember this moment. Remember that you're part of a community that believes in you. Remember that I believe in you. The applause was deafening, and Margaret stood in the center of it, feeling more complete than she had ever felt in her life. This was why she had fought so hard. This was why she had endured the mockery, the dismissals, the endless battles against prejudice and ignorance. Not for herself, but for them, for the next generation. For the blind children who were growing up right now, being told that their dreams were impossible. She was living proof that the impossible was possible, and now these 12 graduates were too. The cycle would continue, the fight would go on, and one day perhaps they would live in a world where a blind person walking into a job interview wouldn't be laughed at, a world where disability wouldn't be a barrier to success. A world where everyone was judged on their abilities rather than their limitations. It was a dream worth fighting for, a future worth building. And Margaret Chen would keep building it one day at a time, for as long as she had breath in her body. The sun was setting over the lighthouse school, casting long shadows across the courtyard where Margaret stood, saying goodbye to the graduates. One by one they came to her, pressing her hand, thanking her for everything she had done. The last to approach was a young woman named Grace, who had been completely silent during the meeting. She was 19 years old, had lost her sight at 15 due to a rare genetic condition, and had struggled more than most to adapt to her new reality. "Ms. Chen," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Does it ever get easier? The way people look at you, the assumptions they make, the feeling of being different." Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "Easier? In some ways, yes. You develop a thicker skin. You learn which battles to fight and which to let go. You find people who see you for who you are and surround yourself with them." She reached out and took Grace's hand. "But in other ways, no. The hurt never completely goes away. The sting of being underestimated, of being dismissed, of being treated as less than, that stays with you no matter how successful you become." "Then why keep fighting?" Grace asked. "If it never stops hurting, why not just give up?" Margaret smiled, squeezing the young woman's hand. "Because giving up means letting them win, means proving all those people right who said we couldn't do it, means closing doors for everyone who comes after us." She leaned closer. "But more than that, because the fight itself is what gives life meaning. The struggle, the challenge, the constant push to be better, to do more, to prove that disability is not inability. That's what makes us strong, Grace. That's what makes us who we are." Grace was silent for a long moment. Then Margaret felt her straighten, felt a new resolve enter her posture. "Thank you, Miss Chen. I think I understand now. Call me Margaret," she said, "and don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead of you. The question is whether you're ready to walk it." Grace's voice was strong when she answered, "I'm ready." Margaret nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then go make the world better. And when it gets hard, and it will get hard, remember that you're not alone. Remember that there are people who believe in you. Remember that I believe in you." She released Grace's hand and stepped back. "Now go. The future is waiting." She listened to Grace's footsteps as she walked away, confident and determined, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And Margaret stood there in the fading light, feeling the warmth of the sunset on her face, hearing the sounds of the city coming alive around her. This was her life's work, not the product she had built or the money she had made or the titles she had held, but these moments, these young people setting out to conquer a world that would try its best to hold them back. They would succeed. She knew they would, because she had taught them the most important lesson of all, that the only limits that mattered were the ones they accepted. And they had learned that lesson well. Margaret Chen smiled as she turned and walked back toward her waiting car. She had meetings tomorrow, phone calls to make, grants to approve, a foundation to run. The work went on, the dream continued. And somewhere out there, a blind girl was walking into her first job interview, nervous and hopeful and determined. Just like Margaret had done, so many years ago. The cycle continued, the story went on. And the world kept getting a little bit better, one courageous step at a time. The end had never felt more like a beginning. On the morning of her 65th birthday, Margaret Chen woke to the sound of birds singing outside her window. She lay still for a moment, listening to their song, feeling the warm sunshine streaming through the curtains and falling across her bed. 31 years had passed since that fateful morning when she had walked into the Harrison Technologies lobby, white cane in hand, dreams in her heart. 31 years of struggle and triumph, of setbacks and breakthroughs, of moments that had shaped her into the woman she was today. She rose slowly, her joints protesting with the familiar aches of age. Her white cane was beside the bed where she always kept it, and she took it up with the ease of decades of practice, navigating her apartment with the automatic confidence of long familiarity. The apartment was quiet. She lived alone now, as she had for most of her adult life. There had been relationships over the years, some more serious than others, but none had lasted. She had always been too dedicated to her work, too focused on her mission, to give a partner the attention they deserved. She didn't regret it, not really. She had built something far more important than a traditional family. She had built a legacy. Her phone buzzed with birthday greetings, messages from Sarah Harrison, now running the company her father had founded, from the graduates of the Lighthouse School, scattered across the country and the world, doing remarkable things in technology and business and public service, from colleagues and friends and people she had never met who wrote to tell her how much her work had meant to them. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source. "Happy birthday, Margaret. I hope this finds you well. I wanted you to know that my son graduated from Berkeley last week with a degree in computer science. He's starting at Microsoft next month, working on accessibility features for their new operating system. He asked me to thank you. He said that you were his inspiration, the proof that anything was possible." It was from Karen Mitchell, now Karen Reynolds, after a second marriage. They had stayed in touch over the years, an unlikely friendship born of shared understanding and mutual respect. Karen had run the parent advocacy program for 15 years before retiring, and her son Michael had grown into a brilliant young man who happened to be blind. Margaret smiled as she listened to the message, feeling the familiar warmth of accomplishment spreading through her chest. This was what it had all been for, not the awards or the accolades, but this. The lives changed, the barriers broken, the proof that disability was not a sentence, but a different kind of strength. Her doorbell rang, and she made her way to answer it. Standing on her doorstep was a young woman she had never met, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. "Miss Chen, I'm sorry to bother you on your birthday, but I had to come in person. My name is Elena Vasquez. You probably don't remember me, but you spoke at my school 15 years ago. I was 12 years old, and I had just lost my sight in an accident. I was ready to give up. I thought my life was over." Margaret nodded, encouraging her to continue. "But then you spoke to us, and you told us about walking into that job interview and being laughed at. You told us about how you proved them all wrong, and I thought if she can do it, maybe I can too." Elena's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm a software engineer now. I work for the Robert Harrison Foundation, developing educational tools for blind children. I've helped thousands of kids learn that their disability doesn't have to hold them back. And it's all because of you, because of what you said that day." Margaret felt tears welling in her eyes. "Come in," she said. "I want to hear everything." They sat in her living room for hours, talking about Elena's journey, her challenges, her triumphs. Margaret listened with the attention she always gave to these stories, because she knew how important they were, not just to the people telling them, but to the larger narrative of what was possible. When Elena finally left, promising to stay in touch, Margaret sat alone in the quiet of her apartment, thinking about the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She was 65 years old. She had accomplished more than she had ever dreamed possible. She had changed the world, not through grand gestures, but through countless small acts of courage and determination. And yet, somehow, she felt that the most important work was still ahead. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Sarah, it's Margaret. I've been thinking about something, and I'd like your opinion." "Of course," Sarah's voice came through warm and welcoming. "What's on your mind?" "I want to write a book," Margaret said. "A memoir, not about me, really, but about all the people who have been part of this journey. The students, the colleagues, the families, everyone who has contributed to changing the way the world sees disability." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said. "What brought this on?" Margaret smiled. "A visitor this morning. A young woman who said I changed her life, but the truth is, she changed mine too. They all have. Every person who has shared their story, every person who has refused to accept the limits the world tried to impose on them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to capture those stories. I want to create a record of what we've accomplished, not for glory, but for the next generation. For the blind children who are growing up right now wondering if they have a future. I want them to know that they do, that the path has already been blazed." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think that's the best birthday present you could give yourself, Margaret. And I think it's exactly the kind of project that would make Dad proud." Margaret nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see it. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." "Thank you," Sarah replied, "for being you." After they hung up, Margaret sat for a long time, thinking about the book she would write. It would be a labor of love, a testament to the human spirit, a celebration of every person who had ever been told they couldn't and proved the world wrong. She would call it Beyond Sight, the stories that changed the world. And she would dedicate it to every blind child who had ever looked into their future and seen only darkness. Because she knew better than anyone that the darkness could be filled with light. All it took was the courage to strike the first match. The book took Margaret 3 years to complete. 3 years of interviews and research, of late nights and early mornings, of writing and rewriting until every word was perfect. She worked with a team of co-writers and editors, people who helped her capture the stories she wanted to tell and shape them into a narrative that would resonate with readers of all backgrounds. But the heart of the book was hers, the passion and determination that had defined her entire life. Beyond Sight, the stories that changed the world, was published on Margaret's 68th birthday. It was an immediate bestseller, praised by critics and readers alike for its honesty, its humanity, and its message of hope. The book told the stories of 52 people, one for each week of the year. There was the boy who had been born without eyes and became a renowned jazz pianist, the woman who had lost her sight in a war zone and now ran a non-profit providing medical care to refugees, the teenager who had been bullied mercilessly for his blindness and went on to create one of the most successful apps in the App Store. And woven throughout these stories was Margaret's own narrative, the thread that tied them all together, her journey from that lonely lobby to the corner office and beyond, her struggles and her triumphs, her unshakable belief that disability was not a limitation, but a different kind of strength. The response was overwhelming. Margaret received thousands of letters from people who said the book had changed their lives. Parents of blind children wrote to thank her for giving them hope. Blind adults wrote to tell her that they finally felt seen and understood. Teachers and caregivers wrote to say that they would never look at disability the same way again. But the letter that meant the most came from an unexpected place. It was from a woman named Jennifer Mitchell, Karen's daughter-in-law. She wrote to tell Margaret that she had read the book aloud to her father-in-law, Michael, Karen's blind son, who was now 33 years old and a senior engineer at Microsoft. When we got to the part about his mother meeting you that first day, Jennifer wrote, Michael started to cry. He said he had never fully understood what his mother had done, how she had tried to turn you away, how she had been forgiven and given a second chance. He called his mother afterward, and they talked for 3 hours. They talked about things they had never talked about before, about prejudice and forgiveness, about growth and redemption, about the power of people to change. Mrs. Chen, I don't know if you'll ever read this letter, but I wanted you to know that your book didn't just tell stories. It healed wounds. It brought people together. It made the world a little bit more whole. Margaret read the letter with tears streaming down her face, overcome by the knowledge that her work was still making a difference, still touching lives, still changing the world. This was her legacy, not the company or the foundation or the awards, but this, the ripples that spread outward from every act of courage, every word of encouragement, every refusal to accept the limitations that others tried to impose. She was 68 years old. Her joints ached. Her energy wasn't what it used to be, but her spirit was as strong as ever, and her determination to make a difference burned just as bright as it had on that fateful morning 34 years ago. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. Sarah, it's Margaret. I've been thinking about our next project. Sarah laughed, the warm laugh of a friend and ally who knew her all too well. Of course you have. What is it this time? A documentary, Margaret said, based on the book. I want to bring these stories to life, to show people what it really means to overcome. I want to reach the people who don't read books, who learn through watching and listening. That sounds expensive, Sarah said, but there was excitement in her voice. It will be, Margaret agreed, but it will also be worth it. Every penny spent, every hour invested, because stories change the world, Sarah, and these stories deserve to be told. There was a moment of silence. Then Sarah spoke, her voice filled with admiration and affection. You know, Margaret, most people your age are thinking about retirement, about slowing down, about enjoying the fruits of their labor. Margaret smiled. I'll rest when the work is done. Will it ever be done? No, Margaret admitted, probably not, but that's what makes it worth doing. The documentary premiered 2 years later at the Tribeca Film Festival. It won 3 awards and was picked up by a major streaming service, eventually being viewed by over 50 million people worldwide. Margaret attended the premiere, walking the red carpet with her white cane and her head held high. Photographers called her name and flashbulbs went off, capturing images of a woman who had refused to be limited by her lack of sight. On the stage afterward, she stood before an audience of thousands and spoke about what the documentary meant to her. When I lost my sight as a child, she said, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never amount to anything, never achieve my dreams, never be seen as anything other than a blind person. She paused, feeling the weight of decades of experience behind her words. I was wrong, so incredibly, wonderfully wrong. She gestured toward the screen behind her, where images from the documentary were still displayed. The people in this film are not defined by their blindness. They are defined by their courage, their creativity, their determination to live full and meaningful lives. They are doctors and artists, engineers and educators, parents and activists. They are proof that disability is not inability. She took a breath, feeling the emotion rising in her chest. I am 70 years old. I have lived a life beyond anything I could have imagined when I was that scared little girl, lying in a hospital bed, being told that I would never see again. And I am here today to tell you that the best is still ahead. For me, for the people in this film, and for every person out there who has ever been told that they can't. She raised her chin, her voice growing stronger. We can, we have, we will continue to do so. The applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that washed over her like a benediction. Margaret Chen stood at the center of it all, 70 years old and still fighting, still dreaming, still proving the world wrong. And somewhere in the audience, a young blind girl was watching, tears streaming down her face, feeling for the first time in her life that anything was possible. The torch had been passed, the story continued, and the world kept getting brighter, one courageous heart at a time. In her final years, Margaret Chen became something close to a legend. She continued to work with the Robert Harrison Foundation, though her role shifted from active leadership to that of an advisor and mentor. She gave speeches and interviews, wrote articles and op-eds, and spent countless hours talking with young blind people who were just starting their own journeys. She was 82 when she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. The ceremony took place in the White House Rose Garden on a beautiful spring afternoon, with flowers blooming and birds singing and the sun warming her face. The president spoke about her accomplishments, the companies she had led, the lives she had changed, the barriers she had broken. But Margaret barely heard the words. She was thinking about the journey that had brought her here, the people who had helped her along the way, the dreams she had dared to dream. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it simple. "I am not a hero," she said. "I am simply a woman who refused to accept the limitations that others tried to impose on me. I am a woman who believed that disability was not a sentence, but a different way of being human. I'm a woman who discovered that the greatest victories are not won on battlefields or in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when we decide to keep going despite the obstacles in our path." She paused, feeling the medal around her neck heavy with significance. "This honor belongs not just to me, but to every person who has ever been told they can't and proved the world wrong, to every blind child learning to read Braille, to every deaf adult fighting for captioned content, to every person in a wheelchair demanding accessible buildings, to everyone who has refused to let their disability define them." She smiled, feeling the tears running down her cheeks. "The work is not finished. There are still barriers to break, still minds to change, still futures to build. But I have seen what is possible when we refuse to give up, and I am confident that the next generation will carry the torch even further than we could ever imagine." She raised her face to the sun. "Thank you for this honor. Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for believing that a blind woman could change the world." The applause that followed was the loudest of her life. Margaret Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years later, at the age of 85. She was surrounded by friends and family, by the people who had loved her and been loved by her, by the community she had built over a lifetime of service. Her funeral was attended by thousands. World leaders sent condolences, newspapers published tributes, social media was flooded with memories and gratitude from the countless lives she had touched. But the most fitting memorial came from the Lighthouse School for the Blind, where a new wing had been named in her honor. On the day it was dedicated, a young blind girl named Hope stood before a crowd of students and teachers, reading a poem she had written herself. "She walked in darkness, but brought us light," the girl recited, her voice clear and strong. "She faced the doubters and proved them wrong. She built a bridge from what is to what could be and showed us all how to cross." The crowd listened in respectful silence as the girl continued. They laughed at her when she came for her dream. They told her she didn't belong, but she stood her ground and changed the world. Her spirit sings on in our song. Margaret Chen, we remember you. We carry your torch, we walk in your way. We are the proof that blindness sees and darkness turns into day. The applause that followed was mixed with tears, as hundreds of blind children stood tall and proud, knowing that they were the living legacy of a woman who had refused to be limited. And somewhere perhaps Margaret Chen was watching, smiling, proud. knowing that the story she had started would continue forever, passed from generation to generation, lighting the way for all who dared to dream beyond the darkness. The receptionist who had laughed was long forgotten, but the blind woman who had walked in that morning determined to prove herself. She had changed everything, and she would never ever be forgotten. The end.